Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees. Episode 20, 1 in 799, the story of Nathaniel, Lucas and Olivia Gascoigne and their descendants. The Lucas family is thought to be the largest descendants of convicts group in Australia. One estimate suggests that 1 in every 799 people in Australia call Nathaniel and Olivia their ancestors. In the Prisoners in Paradise book, written in 2009 by Trevor Lagstrom, he puts their history into a very accessible nutshell. He wrote that theirs is one of the most compelling love stories of any age. Their love survived the most primitive conditions in a strange new land, to which these young people had been transported for all alleged offences which would not even reach the trial stage in today's society. Nathaniel, Lucas and Olivia Gascoigne are not direct descendants of my husband's, however they feature through marriage in my family tree, and I couldn't resist telling their story. Nathaniel Lucas was born on the 19th of August 1764 in Kingston, Surrey, England. He was the son of William John Lucas, who was a builder, and Mary Bradford. Although not wealthy, the family would have been comfortably off, as were tradesfolk of the time. Nathaniel was related to Lord John Lucas, the Earl of Kent. When Lord Lucas died in 1799, the title passed to Prince Edward, the father of Queen Victoria, whose son, the Duke of Edinburgh, visited Australia in 1866, and during this visit he privately spent a day with Nathaniel and Olivia's son, John's family. Nathaniel married Margaret Mitchell on the 25th of August 1782 in Surrey, England, aged 18. They had a son, James, on the 24th of March 1784 in Surrey. However, Margaret died giving birth to James. James died in London in 1843. James had one son. He was also called James, and his death is recorded in Tasmania in 1892. Nathaniel Lucas was a joiner, carpenter, builder, millwright, and boat builder. When his son James was only 4 months old, on the 7th of July 1784, he was convicted at the Old Bailey before Mr. Rose of having stolen linen clothing from his neighbour to the value of £2, 2 shillings and 2 pence. Nathaniel was evidently out of favour with the wife of the publican at the Red Lion Inn at Holborn, near London, where he had lodgings, whilst working as a builder. They had clashed over her demands for early payment of board, and his lack of patronage at the inn's bar. He refused to pay his lodgings early, and the next morning found himself awakened by the police constable, the publican, and a neighbour, who on searching his room found an apron, a towel, a shawl, and 6 muslin caps belonging to the neighbour's daughter stuffed under a mattress. He protested his innocence at the trial, stating that several people had access to the room which he shared with another man. However, he was sentenced to 7 years' transportation. While awaiting transportation, he spent almost 3 years in the unhealthy, overcrowded conditions on the Ceres Hulk from the 23rd of May 1785 for 2 years, and then the Census Hulk on the 3rd of January 1787. Both hulks are in the Thames River. These unseaworthy ships were used to house the overflow from the prisons in a most unsanitary state. He sailed on the Scarborough in the First Fleet in May 1787. The First Fleet sailed for 3 weeks before docking at Santa Cruz, Tenerife, an island off Spain, to take on supplies which included water and vegetables. 2 months later, after crossing the Atlantic, the fleet docked at Rio de Janeiro on the 6th of August 1787. The First Fleet remained there for 3 weeks before sailing to the Cape of Good Hope. On the 13th of October, numerous supplies were taken on board, including vegetables and meat. After another break, the fleet left on the 12th of November 1787 to arrive at Botany Bay between January 18 and January 20. The location was considered unsuitable for settlement, and so the fleet pushed on to Port Jackson with the arrival date being the 26th of January 1788, that is now claimed as Australia Day. On the 14th of February 1788, after the fleet's arrival, Lucas was chosen to go to Norfolk Island with a group to settle the island, as he was a valuable asset as a carpenter in the new community. Lieutenant Philip King was instructed by Governor Phillip to choose a party of 22 people whose characters stand fairest and whose skills would be of most use, to pioneer the first settlement of Norfolk Island. The basis for this settlement was twofold. Firstly, it was to forestall the French from settling there, and secondly, to use the pine and flax on Norfolk Island to make and repair masts and sails for ships which were returning to England. Norfolk Island, which is 1,368 kilometres east of Australia, had been discovered by Captain James Cook in October 1774, and Norfolk Island was uninhabited at this time. The Norfolk Island founding group, which was made up of 7 free men, 9 male convicts and 6 female convicts, including both Nathaniel and his wife-to-be, Olivia Rose Gascoigne. This new venture was not compulsory. The women had been offered the choice of joining the Norfolk settlement. King listed the advantages over staying in Port Jackson, as the prospect of family life was offered, as Philip had said that if any partiality or reciprocal affection should take place, they might marry. Olivia Rose Gascoigne was born on the 19th of February 1763 at Sevenoaks, Worcestershire, England, into an aristocratic Yorkshire family. Her parents were John G. Gascoigne and Sarah Partridge Vernon Wentworth. Her father John was the High Sheriff of Yorkshire, and the family home was the largest castle in England at the time, Wentworth Castle. The name Olivia Gascoigne appears 3 times in the castle's records. John Gascoigne's parents were John Gascoigne and Olivia Partridge, and John Gascoigne was a naval captain who commanded the HMS Greyhound in Admiral Thomas Rowley's fleet. Olivia's family in Australia still possess a locket with a painting believed to be that of Captain Thomas Rowley, and Mary Rowley, daughter of Captain Rowley of the New South Wales Corps, married Olivia's son John. More on that later in part 2. She was related to the Wentworths through her mother Sarah. These Wentworths were the same family, that of Darcy Wentworth, who had a distinguished career in the Australian colonies, and whose son William Wentworth was the famous statesman and explorer. Olivia was also related to the Duke of Argyll, Clarence and Cumberland, both through legitimate and non-legitimate associations. How would a young lady of privileged birth end up in the British courts and ultimately be sentenced to hang for her crime? Well, much has been written about the daughters of upper-class families who rebelled against being paraded on the marriage market in order to be judged by eligible suitors on their excellent needlework, genteel manners, and the size of their dowries. Olivia's problems, which culminated in her being transported to New South Wales, may have stemmed from a dispute within the Wentworth family. The Gascoignes were the originals of a line which merged with the Wentworths to become the Earls of Stafford. Some descendants have recalled that Olivia always asserted such a connection. At about the time of Olivia's birth, the Stafford estates were carved up. The Gascoignes inherited the title of High Sheriffs of Yorkshire and the use of Wentworth Castle from the Wentworths, while the Wentworths continued as the Earls of Stafford but acquired the lesser estate of Wentworth Wodehouse. The Earls of Stafford were the cousins of the Marquess of Liverpool, the Duke of Argyll, the Duke of Clarence and the Duke of Cumberland, and were all Yorkshire aristocrats. A cousin, Sir Thomas Watson Wentworth, was Prime Minister of England in 1782. He was of the Wodehouse faction. Olivia was of the Castle faction. It would seem that Olivia enjoyed more exciting adventures, one of which was being in the company of a group of young men when they robbed, at gunpoint, one Edward Griffith. Despite not being accused of holding the pistol or personally profiting from the robbery, she was found guilty and sentenced to hang. One theory behind her sentencing is that due to the long-standing family feud over Wentworth Castle, that when Olivia got herself into trouble and went to court, that the other side of the family ensured that she received a sentence. Olivia was 24 years old when she was brought to the Worcester Lent Assizes on the 5th of March 1785. She stood trial for the theft with force of arms from a dwelling house of 13 gold guineas and 1 foreign silver dollar. Olivia's occupation at the time of her sentencing is listed that she was in service. Olivia was sentenced to be hanged, but fortunately, as this was the day before the judge was to retire, he commuted all his current death sentences as a final act from the bench. She was imprisoned, awaiting transportation. It could also have been a result of representation by one or other of her influential relatives, but she did receive the royal prerogative of mercy by the king, and she was reprieved to 7 years' transportation on the 28th of December and held in the Worcester jail until ordered to the Southwark jail. From Southwark she went with a group of women who embarked on the Lady Penrhyn on the 31st of January 1787. The ships of the First Fleet took up to 4 months before they set sail. Women on the Lady Penrhyn were said to be filthy and almost naked, many suffering fever or venereal diseases. The fleet sailed without clothing for the female convicts, despite repeated applications by Governor Phillip to the British Home Office. They also left without the convict papers, giving them details of their crimes and sentences. These were important in providing Governor Phillip with records of the type of people with whom he was going to found a nation, and at the time he would be obliged to grant them land, and at the expiry of their sentences, Governor Phillip was most meticulous in the care of the convicts, insisting they be given a period of time each day on deck to exercise without their chains and provide fresh food whenever possible to prevent scurvy. They left Sydney Cove on the Supply on the 15th of February 1788, and it delivered them finally to Norfolk Island on the 6th of March. The ship carried not only the settlers, but also supplies which were to last for 6 months. The party arrived in bad weather on the 29th of February and had to lay offshore until the weather calmed sufficiently to permit a landing. As Norfolk Island was uninhabited, the settlers were disappointed that their early attempts at growing food were devastated by grubs, rats and other pests, and at the mercy of very strong winds off the sea. They managed to supplement their diet with turtles, fish and mutton birds, and having selected some land well away from the coastal winds, they achieved success with crops and vegetables in the July and the August of that year. The convicts who were chosen for Norfolk Island had been told that it would be possible for relationships and marriages to be undertaken, and it is believed the marriage of Nathanial and Olivia were one of several that were solemnised by Dr. Jamieson in 1788 in a civil ceremony within weeks of their arrival. The Lucas marriage was legalised on the 5th of November 1791 by Reverend Richard Johnson when he visited the island. The Lucases seem to have lived their life on Norfolk with a quiet and industrious dignity. Official journals at the time recorded all punishments meted out to convicts. However, neither Nathaniel nor Olivia were mentioned. By the time of their arrival on Norfolk Island, Olivia bore Nathaniel children annually to the total of 13, 11 of those children surviving infancy. The first child, Anne, was one of the first children to be born on Norfolk Island on the 2nd of March 1779. She was listed as Anne Gaskins, a misspelling of Gascoigne, as it was a custom of the Marine Corps to register all of the children of convicts after their mother's surname. She was born 2 months after the birth of Norfolk King, the first child to be born on the island to Governor King and convict Anne Innet. A year later, on the 17th of August 1790, the twins Mary and Sarah arrived. However, tragedy struck the couple on the 15th of August 1792. In order to facilitate clearing his land, Nathaniel lit some huge old pines in the vicinity of his newly built house. He was horrified when a freak wind gust caused one tree to fall directly onto the house, completely demolishing it. Olivia, the 2-year-old twins, Mary and Sarah, and baby William were inside. The twins were killed instantly, and Olivia sustained life-threatening injuries. William, who was being nursed by his mother, miraculously escaped injury. Mary and Sarah were laid to rest in the original burial ground at Emily Bay. Olivia slowly recovered, but it is said that she subsequently always walked with a limp. The incident was recorded by Lieutenant Governor King in his daily journal. A plaque near what is believed to be the twins' burial place was placed there by the Lucas Gascoigne descendants in 2002. Nathaniel was recognised as an excellent worker, using the famous Norfolk Island pines as a joiner and carpenter to supply and repair masts for ships returning to England. In 1791, after his sentence expired, he was granted 15 acres of land at Grenville Valley, and he was selling grain to stores, and he built a home on the site. On the 31st of December 1792, Nathaniel was appointed Superintendent of Convict Carpenters, Blacksmiths and Sawyers. He was also a constable, and he had the water supply contract. During his 15 years on Norfolk, Nathaniel built administrative buildings and homes for the settlers, and on various occasions took over grants of land which were abandoned when the settlers left Norfolk Island. In 1793, a few years after his initial grant, Nathaniel increased his land holdings when he bought a further 60 acres from a former Marine, Charles Heritage, which he used to farm wheat, maize and pork. This was a successful farming venture, as it was recorded in August 1802 that his wheat, maize and pork was worth £450 to the government. During his stay on Norfolk Island, Nathaniel was directed to erect a watermill for settlement and permitted to build a windmill on his own estate. On the 11th of June 1795, he had succeeded William Peat as Master Carpenter. He was suspended from the 5th of September 1800 to the 13th of March 1802. He was then reappointed on the 22nd of May 1802, and he held this post until the establishment was reduced in 1805. His relationship with Lieutenant Governor Philip King was on such a good footing that when Nathaniel wrote a letter to his father on the 20th of October 1796, it was King who personally carried the letter and attempted to deliver it. King was unable to track down John Lucas, and today the letter is in the Mitchell Library. And the letter says, "Dear Father, after so long an absence, an account of my state of health and situation will no doubt be pleasing to you, and I have the pleasing satisfaction to acquaint you that myself and my family are all in perfect good health, and thank God and my own industry are very comfortably situated. My family at the present time consists of my wife and 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. I had the unspeakable misfortune to lose 2 twin girls by an accident which could be represented in a proper manner, would awaken the most tender feelings and melt the hardest heart into sympathy. It was by the fall of a pine tree which stood near my house, which buried my lovely infants in the ruins, and almost my worthy partner, who merely escaped with her life, for she was dragged out into a situation in which her life was despaired of. Oh, Father, I am not able to express the poignant grief I felt on this very shocking scene, without dwelling long upon the subject, together with the variety of misfortunes liable to those who transgress the laws of their country. I can now with truth assert that I have surmounted them all, and with the blessing of God I hope that in the course of 2 years to return to my native country with the competency for life. I am Master Carpenter of this island, for which I receive a salary of £50 per annum. I have 2 freeholds consisting of 75 acres of land. I should be wanting very much to gratitude if I did not acquaint you that my present good fortune is to be inputted in a measure to the humane goodness and assiduous respect of Lieutenant Governor King, who has ever promised my interest since my residence on this island. Perhaps it would not be unentertaining to you to give you some account of this island, which I believe to be one of the most fertile in the world. It produces 2 crops in the year, one of wheat and another of Indian corn. The crops of wheat is rather precarious on the account of the variance of the climate. Potatoes and vegetables of all kinds are produced in great abundance, and will grow in any month of the year, provided there is little rain when planted. The wheat harvest generally commences about December, which is for the most part excessive, hot, and often accompanied with thunderstorms. The Indian corn is usually planted in June and January. This island produces several kinds of fruit, watermelons, bananas, a rich and red berry called tomatoes, or gooseberries, a native cone which grows upon vines, grapes, figs, apples, lemons, and various other kinds of fruits come into great perfection. Fish is of excellent quality and are plentiful on this coast. Hogs are bred here in great quantities. Poultry without quantity of sheep and goats. I had the honour, under the direction of Lieutenant Governor King, to construct a watermill for the government and a windmill on my own estate. I have permission from His Honour Lieutenant Governor King for you or any of my friends to wait upon him who will afford any necessary assistance you may require. Do not fail in embracing the first opportunity in writing to me. Remember me to all my family and friends and relations. Farewell, and may God Almighty bless you. From your affectionate son, Nath Lucas. P.S. Remember me to my brothers and sisters, and to all inquiring friends of any one of my relations. May upon Governor King, who will acquaint you particularly of my situation. The other children born in their time on Norfolk Island were William in 1792, Nathaniel Jr. in 1793, Olivia 1795, John 1796, James in 1798, George in 1800, Charles in 1801, and Sarah in 1803. In typical fashion of the era, the names of the children who died were recycled and were given to children born later. Mary and Sarah were the names of Nathaniel and Olivia's mothers, and John was the name of both their fathers. In 1804, Nathaniel, Olivia and their family moved to Sydney. Philip Gidley King, who had been appointed Governor of New South Wales, invited Nathaniel to erect a windmill for the government at Church Hill, where the Sydney Harbour tollgate now stands, and gave permission to Nathaniel to build another one for his own use, an octagonal smock mill in the government domain, which is the present site of the Shakespeare Memorial near the State Library of New South Wales. The windmills were prefabricated at Norfolk Island and brought to Sydney on the HMS Investigator. This type of mill was constructed in a way not built in the colony previously. They were of the post type, with propellers rotating on a post, their direction determined by sails placed like rudders. Modern wind-powered bores work on the same principle. Prior to that, the mills were direction by calculation and mechanical means. Nathaniel and his sons were later to build more windmills elsewhere in the colony. In 1805, Nathaniel leased the Domain Mill to Henry Cable, hence it being recorded today as Cable's Post Mill. The land on which St Philip's Anglican Church now stands was once owned by Nathaniel Lucas. Nathaniel's transfer in 1804 had coincided with the death of the colony's superintendent of carpenters, James Bloodworth, and in April 1805 he assumed the position of the colony's superintendent of carpenters, and his work then included the Rum Hospital, which is now part of the Old Mint, Macquarie Street. The Rum Hospital got its name from the concession granted to its builders for the importation and sale of liquor in the colony. After Nathaniel constructed the hospital, he was probably paid in cash from the proceeds of the liquor sales. Mary Ann, their next child, was born in Sydney in December 1805, and then their last child, Thomas, in 1807. Nathaniel became a private builder living at Church Hill, next door to John MacArthur. The site today is known as 1 York Street. In 1808, after the rebellion against William Bligh, he was formally appointed Superintendent of Carpenters at a salary of £50, with the extra privileges of victualling from the government stores and using assigned servants, and he held this position until 1814. I'll just divert for a moment to explain what was meant by the rebellion against Captain Bligh. To give you a bit of background, Bligh arrived in August 1806 to Australia with orders to control the use of alcohol as barter, to restrict the trade monopolies and end corruption amongst the corps. He arrived without any of his own soldiers for support and, like his predecessors, was a Navy officer. Bligh was competent, strong-willed and determined, but these qualities were not tempered by tact and charm. He'd been sent because he was disciplinarian. Bligh had been informed by his patron, Sir Joseph Banks, that MacArthur would be his main adversary. MacArthur was now a private citizen. He resigned rather than face a court-martial for attacking his commanding officer, and he almost immediately clashed with Bligh over a 10,000-acre land grant that the governor refused to confirm. The relationship between the two men gradually worsened as Bligh tried to re-establish government control of the economy and justice system. In trying to limit the rum trade, Bligh forbade bartering and introduced regulations securing the government control of ships in port. Major Johnston disliked Bligh not only because of his attempts to erode the Corps' rum monopoly, but also because the governor showed open contempt for his unit's officers and men. On the 25th of January 1808, MacArthur faced trial on various charges arising from a refusal to pay a fine. Presiding at the court was Richard Atkins, the colony's judge advocate, and 6 Corps officers. MacArthur refused to be tried by Atkins on the grounds that Atkins owed him money. MacArthur was supported by his 6 Corps former colleagues, and Atkins departed for Government House seeking help from Bligh. The next day, Bligh wrote to the 6 officers demanding that they present themselves at Government House to face charges of treason. Unwilling to do this, the officers summoned Johnston. When he arrived at the Corps barracks, he made the extraordinary decision to appoint himself as Lieutenant Governor, arrest Bligh, though he had no legal right to do so. In this, he no doubt heavily was influenced by MacArthur. So on the evening of the 26th of January 1808, Johnston marched almost the entire Corps to Government House, where they found Bligh. The legend that the governor was hiding under his bed was almost certainly started by the Corps. Johnston and MacArthur took control of the colony, proclaiming they represented an end to Bligh's tyranny. Bligh remained under arrest in Government House with his widowed daughter for more than a year, refusing to return to England, despite being under pressure to do so, until relieved by a legally appointed successor. In March 1809, Bligh, under duress, finally agreed to return to England, but once aboard his ship, HMS Porpoise, he reneged and sailed for Van Diemen's Land, where he sought help from its Lieutenant Governor, David Collins. Collins refused to help him, so Bligh remained in Hobart for another year, mostly aboard the Porpoise, before returning to Sydney in January 1810, by which time the new governor, Lachlan Macquarie, had arrived. Macquarie was an army officer and landed with the 73rd Regiment, which replaced the New South Wales Corps. And in May 1810, Bligh finally sailed for England. Johnston and MacArthur had made the trip a year before in order to defend their actions and undermine the former governor. Back to Nathaniel. He was granted a liquor licence in 1809 and built the Trafalgar Hotel in Churchill. As one of the builders of the Rum Hospital, he was given permission to import and sell alcohol. By 1810, Nathaniel had been established as a successful tradesman and a sound businessman. At this time, he exchanged his post mill for a lease at Liverpool, where together with Olivia and some of his children, he became a grazier and farmer, in addition to continuing with his building trade. His son William took over the Trafalgar Hotel. In 1813, he was appointed superintendent of the government lumber yard and had 61 men under him. In the next year, when Governor Lachlan Macquarie published Bathurst's order abolishing the privileges attached to this and many other offices, Lucas with many others petitioned the governor for their restoration, and Macquarie suspended the order. However, from this time, Lucas gave increasing attention to building contracts. In 1816, he was the builder of the parsonage at Liverpool and was associated with that at Parramatta. Both have now been demolished since. The marriage failed during 1816, and Olivia and 6 of her surviving children moved to Launceston, Tasmania. The children engaged in boat building and farming and had 100 acres at Port Dalrymple. Apparently, Nathaniel did not visit the family. However, John and Charles, 2 of his sons, commuted between Tasmania and Sydney. Olivia took the family to Launceston to develop a supply of wheat, which would synchronise with the family windmill operations at Liverpool that was still being run by Nathaniel. One of their sons, John, also built a windmill at Liverpool called Brisbane Watermill, which augmented production. In 1818, Nathaniel gained the contract for building St Luke's Church, Liverpool, which Francis Greenway designed, and was present when Macquarie laid its foundation stone on the 7th of April. Greenway, however, quarrelled with Lucas over the hospital initially when they worked together, and they again quarrelled over the foundations of the church. Greenway alleged that Lucas was much addicted to the bottle and that he was using very poor stone at the church. It is said that while Governor Macquarie was laying the foundation stone at St Luke's, Nathaniel and Greenway were quarrelling so loudly that the governor's speech was all but drowned out. Following the argument from Greenway, Nathaniel went missing from his home for several days. A contemporary record exists stating that Nathaniel, previously a teetotaler, was suffering from a disease of the mouth and enduring severe and intolerable pain for which he used rum as an analgesic, which was the usual practice. He ended up with a drinking problem. Some say he had cancer of the face or a severe form of neuralgia. His son Nathaniel Jr., on his father's death certificate, states that he had cancer of the face, and it could also be a manifestation of the hereditary blood disorder, hemochromatosis, that recurs in Lucas descendants to this day. On the 28th of April 1818, Nathaniel was found dead. His body was found in the mud of the Georges River at Liverpool by two of his sons. They had been searching for him after he left for Parramatta 6 days before and had never arrived. Olivia was convinced that Greenway had murdered him, but the circumstances of Nathaniel's death will probably never truly be known. No record of any inquest exists. He was aged 54, and his death was said to have proceeded from his own act owing to mental derangement. There was an article in the Sydney Gazette. On Tuesday last, the dead body of Mr. Nathaniel Lucas, for many years known in this colony and Norfolk Island as a respectable builder, was found left by the tide at 20 yards distance from the Moore Bridge in Liverpool, which unhappy catastrophe appeared to have proceeded from his own act owing to mental derangement. He had been 6 days absent from his family at Liverpool, and on the pretext of going to Parramatta, but his long absence, connected with other circumstances that gave rise to apprehension, naturally induced his sons to go on a quest of him, the result which was that he was found by one of his sons. Nathaniel was buried in Liverpool. His headstone now stands in the grounds of St Luke's Church of England, Liverpool. The family momentarily returned to New South Wales in July 1818 to tidy up the financial affairs of Nathaniel, and it was found that Nathaniel was heavily in debt at the time of his death. For Olivia, a saga had ended. During her 17 years on Norfolk Island, she diligently performed the often arduous and tedious tasks demanded of convict women: washing, gardening, sweeping, sewing, cooking, and so on, as well as labouring on the family's land and bearing 13 children. And subsequently for 25 years in New South Wales and Van Diemen's Land, she helped run the family farms and businesses. But Olivia's contribution remained unrecorded, and her death certificate describes her profession as wife of Mr. Nathaniel Lucas. In 1824, she was granted land in her own right, but it was at that time that the Lucas empire began to unravel. William and Nathaniel Jr.'s fine self-built ship, Olivia, was wrecked near Twofold Bay with its cargo of Lucas grain, and William and John's building business in Sydney collapsed. Olivia lost everything because she went guarantor for her sons. All her effects went under the hammer to pay for the family debts. The sheriff also sold up Nathaniel's land grant at Minto on the 24th of March 1829, forcing Olivia to return to Launceston permanently. Olivia died at Launceston on the 12th of June 1830, her age given as 69, and she was buried at St John's Church of England, Launceston. Nathaniel and Olivia left behind a large family of children and grandchildren, and in part 2 of this episode I will be outlining what became of those children and the next line of descendants. If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes